Hi, I'm Valerie Blatt, the Chief Revenue Officer of the Business Network at SAP. And as many of you know, SAP is one of the world's largest cloud companies. I'm here today talking to 3 amazing supply chain leaders about what's going on in their world. I really hope you enjoy it. Thank you guys for being here with me today. It's good to see you. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself in a quick minute. I'm Val Blatt. Nice to meet all of you. I'm from SAP, and I'm the CRO of our business network inside of SAP, which is a collaborative supply chain network. So all of you may be aware, maybe not. So I'm going to ask you maybe just to give a quick intro to yourself. But the one thing I want to ask you as you're doing the intro, something Tracy Joshua said on stage yesterday really intrigued me. She said, I got into supply chain on purpose, and talked about how some people actually just come into the job by accident, a happy accident. So why don't we start with you, Monique? Give us just the who you are, who you work for, and is it on purpose or by accident?
Good question.
Yeah.
Monique Piku. I work for Google. I lead our supply chain and our operations team. And I've always been in supply chain. I started at a CPG company, and we started out in that way, and I've stayed with it. So I feel pretty good about that.
Amazing. Yeah. Paul.
Yes. So I work for General Mills.
Yeah.
Before General Mills, I was with Diageo, which is a drinks business and
Yes.
brewer by trade.
Yeah.
And was I always in supply chain? I actually started off as an engineer. So I moved from engineering, then saw the excitement of supply chain, had a brief excursion into sales, but knew that wasn't necessarily for me.
So I can't talk you into coming over.
And so did my manager. But
Yeah.
That wasn't for me either. So I ended up back in supply chain.
That's amazing. And you used to code, I heard you say.
I used to code, which was dangerous, let me into the system, but that's long gone by. That's probably showing my age now.
That's amazing.
And I'm Kyle Carlisle. I'm at Walmart, and I lead part of our sourcing strategy around surety of supply. And so what that means to Walmart is how we build resilience into how we source our products around the world, which tends to be a lot of supply chain. I grew up in kind of the supply chain industry, and that's where I've been the whole time. I'm an engineer as well. I think you have like a couple paths you can take as an engineer. It feels like all roads lead to supply chain at some point.
Supply chain, yeah. Okay, so we have 3 people who chose supply chain. So this is amazing. We actually polled the audience to see what they wanted to most hear about from all of you. Shockingly, number 1 on the list was cost. I was a little surprised to hear that, and maybe it's because resiliency and those have been overdone over the last 2 years. They're here to stay, but maybe maybe people are feeling a little bit of the pressure of inflation. And so I'm gonna talk about inflation a little bit, or ask you to talk about inflation, and we'll start with whoever wants to start. But how are you viewing cost control in your supply chains, and how does it relate to inflation? And what are you doing about it? And interestingly, because it's number 1 on everybody's list, or it showed up as number 1, is it number 1 on your list for the year and going into 2025? So who wants to start? And then let's just roll with it. Yeah. Okay.
So Walmart's known for everyday low cost.
For sure.
That is our core mission of how we serve our customers around the world. And by nature, that's how our supply chain operates. So it's kind of core foundational to everything we do. What hasn't been core is resilience. And so that's something we've been working on over the last several years. So I don't think that's going out of style. I hope it doesn't, because that's part of my role. But it's certainly something that we think about every day. Cost is always going to be there. And that's something that there's always going to be trade-offs. There's always going to be decisions, and how you weigh those trade-offs are really important. What Walmart's done in that regard is to look farther north in our supply chain. So as we think about our suppliers, who are our suppliers of our suppliers, and how are they working together, and how do we help support that in a better way? And so that's an approach Walmart's taking.
Like just multi-tier supply chain.
Yeah, multi-tiered, and whether it's private brands or national brands, are we looking far enough north in the supply chain to find out where are we more similar than different? And are there strategies we can work on together?
Yeah. So cost never went out of style.
No.
Still in style. You just added some resilience in there.
For sure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And you have a different take or the same take?
You know what I was going to say, and you took the words out of my mouth, is that in supply chain, cost savings just never goes out of style. It just never goes out of style, right? And so for us, when I think about the thing that's important to us, I mean, AI has come on fast, right? And COVID did us all a favor because people who didn't know they had supply chains found out really quickly.
Yeah.
And you can't buy your way into it.
Yeah.
You really have to think about how to be creative. And for us, it's learning how to innovate in supply chain. It's learning how to think about, similar to what you talked about, Kyle, there's the tiering in the layers. There's also multi-sourcing in terms of the components that you use. It is understanding where you can create leverage in your pricing strategy. It looks at how do you give the organization an opportunity to be unleashed in talent in places where you haven't thought about there might be losses? Because in order to provide that competitive advantage, you have to make sure you're looking at not just the big components, but the little ones too, because you can have death by 1,000 cuts in supply chain because there are 1,000 things you got to work on. And there's always something to chase. But learning how to have fun in the chase is different, but it's a requirement, right?
Yeah.
Because you know it's never going to go out of style. If you allow it to overwhelm you, then you can't think straightly. You got to be calm about what you need to do and then figure out what is your competitive advantage. If you're always looking over at someone else, you miss your own. And you have to figure out what is your unique competition and what you bring to the table. And that's what we spend our time on.
So I want to hear from you in a second, but I want to just maybe double click on something you said about having fun in the chase.
Yeah.
Did the COVID catastrophe, if you will, move people's eyes off the ball of managing cost into something else, or was it always there?
I don't think COVID moved the ball. I think COVID exposed the opportunity.
I see.
Because, again, people assume supply chain was this thing that you did associated with maybe CPG, maybe some. It's there. Everybody has a supply chain.
Everybody,
whether you own it or not, is a different thing. But everybody has a supply chain.
Yeah,
I don't know where you don't have one, and if you haven't recognized that, then there are failure points waiting to be exposed because you haven't understood how do you get what you get, right? Whether you're selling a good or a service, there's still elements of the supply chain, even if it's just talent that have to be managed.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so speaking of CPG or what do you think? How is this showing up at General Mills?
Well, so similar to what's already been said, and I echo exactly that, is that, we've always had an always-on approach from a cost reduction, a cost-focus perspective, whether it be everyday low costs or whether it be optionalities that you had to explore, especially during the pandemic. One of the things that has been ingrained for many years within General Mills is a program that we call HMM, which is Holistic Margin Management. So, and to put that in perspective, we have on our plate at any time during the year over 6,000 projects that are focused on productivity. Some of them will realize value within weeks and could be, those $500 projects, but everybody has that fixation with ensuring that we're optimizing our cost structure, because we know that not alone is that a competitive advantage for it, but it's what our customer needs and it's what our consumer needs, is to ensure that we have that always-on approach. I think in addition to looking at the opportunity for cost, there's also even more of a focus on how we can enhance the margin piece of that, because sometimes there's a value proposition and actually increasing the spend in order for it to drive bigger value, and be thinking of longer term projects and opportunities that are more transformational in nature that may require a cost spend up front, but actually is driving bigger value for the longer term. And that's the space that excites us most, because the reality is that the opportunity, whether it be through your supplier, it's in those cracks of complexities where the opportunity. It's not where you historically went for within your silo. You've got to be looking across the entirety of your supply chain and your supplier's supply chain and their suppliers' supply chain.
So there's a lot of, you're in very different industries, but a lot of, I hear Monique over here going, yes. So there's a lot of red thread through supply chains, as you said. Everybody has a supply chain. On the topic of inflation, because I think I'm interested in your perspectives on inflation. I read I was listening to a podcast. I was talking about inflation, and it actually correlated it to what's happening in supply chains, meaning a lot of supply chains have miscues in their demand planning because there's not as much cash and people aren't spending as much. And this it probably does affect you too, but so demand planning has become much more important. Working capital, so companies don't have as much free cash, so how they're spending their money changes. So I'm just curious, in the topic of inflation itself, is anybody seeing that they're managing their supply chains different, or that they had some cracks or some opportunities based on the inflationary activity? How has that affected you?
Yeah, I don't think we're seeing that impact there. Walmart has maybe a different supply chain as it relates to inflation, deflation. Yeah. Customers are going to shop us regardless. And so in forecasting, the good thing about a forecast is it's always wrong.
Yeah.
And so
amazing.
You can try to get as precise as you want, and trying to forecast demand is something that Walmart has been working with our suppliers since 60 years, since we started as Walmart. And so I think that's something that will continue. It's something that the coordination between supplier and retailer or customer is always going to be incredibly important, so that you have inventory control all the way through. You don't have that extra waste, and you're also meeting that demand for the customer at the end of the supply chain. So that's where we focus. I don't think inflation is throwing any curveballs in there that we haven't found before.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
I think it's back to the future, right? It's not like you haven't seen it before. It just looked a little different.
Yeah.
And because there was a sort of a lockdown with COVID, and then a resurgence of people getting fresh air. And then when you get that, you look at the cost of things, because there was a period where goods and shipments weren't moving. And therefore, when it starts back moving, you have to make up for that cost picture somewhere. And so when I think about inflation, what I think about is, how do you take, just as you said, Kyle, you got inflation, you got deflation, but more importantly, it is, what is the demand signal and what is the supply plan for it, right? You got to have agility in your supply planning to be able to absorb the aggregate demand, and then be able to explode that bomb for that aggregate demand into something that you can work with. And so instead of holding finished good, you're holding maybe raw materials to help you balance out some of those elements, such that you can be more nimble and agile when you're trying to respond. And I can tell you, if you've ever lived in a world where there's no demand, it's never good.
Yeah.
So I'd take the high case demand all day long.
That's a good problem.
Chase for it.
Yeah.
Those problems you like.
Yeah.
The other ones are twice as hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the point that you raised there about the demand planning, and one of the things that we did in General Mills was make that fundamental change for it to hold inventory further up your supply chain to be able to react.
Correct.
Because you're absolutely right, is that the one thing that we get wrong is the demand plan.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, we're there to deliver what the customer and the consumer desires. So having the agility and the flexibility to be able to quickly pivot as soon as you get the signal, and working super close with your customer to understand that and realize opportunity. And dare I say it, realize the opportunity when maybe some of your competition aren't realizing the opportunity, has been one of the unlock for us in us getting supply chain folks actually integrated across our customer and our supplier base, rather than historically the way that it was, which is it was more of a sales focus interface.
Yeah.
So now that signal we get early, and we're able to react a lot quicker. It's far from perfect, but we are differential from where we were a few years ago, because we're using the supply chain to be the competitive advantage, rather than purely look, and this is kind of the balance, as you mentioned earlier, in around the cost piece, is that it's far more impactful to be able to influence and deliver product on shelf than for it to be actually streamlining your costs right down in the end level of detail.
So I was going to pivot to AI, but I want to maybe just talk a little bit about what you just said, which I think is very interesting. And it's always something when I'm talking to some of our customers I ask about, and I see this change. Our customers, viewing supply chain as a revenue driver and not just a cost saver. So are you seeing that pivot? And then how does that show up in your organizations, just how you're organized and how you're measured and how you're viewed inside the four walls of your companies?
It's interesting because some of the changes actually for us is a change in the language, and actually it's a change in the language within even supply chain.
Yeah.
So we talk, rather than talk about cost reduction, which is a critical part of what we do, we talk about margin enhancing. Because when you talk about margin enhancing, you talk about how you can add value rather than how you take cost out. And that mindset change has actually opened up opportunities that allows us to actually work closer with our customers and right through to our suppliers to think about what can we do differential in order for it to drive margin, whether that be speed of product innovation, or whether it be opportunity to deliver something that either the competition can't or something that's differential for the customer and the consumer. Yeah. And that in itself, I think, has changed our perspective on the value driver, which is about enhancing margin and creating growth rather than solely about cost reduction that, dare I say, may have been more of a focus of it.
Yeah. See, you could have been in sales. You didn't know you had a career path there.
Yeah. You know what? I think it's important to be intentional, right? So when you think about how you're organized, you think about supply chain in and of itself can be very tactical in an organization. But if you look at the wins that you can have, and you talk about the margin enhancement in terms of the value that you offer, then there's a really good sweet spot. But you have to have people focus on it because the day-to-day activities will drive you into day-to-day.
Yeah.
If no one is starting to look at what can we do with what we've garnered here and how we can leverage that, you'll stay in this spin. And that's okay, but you don't get ahead that way. You just barely keep up, right? In order to leapfrog, you've got to have some intentionality in the organization. And supply chain has to have people looking at that, right? Helping to create that. And you find it in a lot of places, right? Suppliers want to innovate. They want to do some things. We need them to innovate. We have a need that we see. We look at all of the options that are on the table, and having part of the org always thinking about what can we do differently in this one is what we have seen is helping us. Are we where we need to be? No, because this race is real. Yeah. But you never start running the race, right? Yeah. It's always on jog. There's never kind of a stop. It's always on jog. And then you get a sprint when you get a really good innovation lever. And we've seen a couple of those that have been able to help us reduce time, because for me, time is currency. And I have to make that currency work and add value for us.
Yeah. Always on jog. You have some good ones. I'm going to write these down. Anything to add there?
I would just say, in classic Walmart fashion, like, volume drives a lot. And working with our suppliers, we do a thing called a rollback. And what we'll do is we'll say, hey, let's go set a new price in the market for this box of cereal or for this item XYZ. And the reason we do that is because we want to drive efficiencies all the way upstream in the supply chain by driving that volume through the supply chain. And then we hope that price sticks because we want to give our customer the lowest prices. And so we know that we can trigger that all the way for our customers to help drive that volume and drive those efficiencies, because more full trucks, more full pallets, all of that matters in the supply chain. And the more we can flow goods more efficiently, we know that matters to our suppliers, and it definitely matters to our customers when the price is there.
Interesting. Okay. I am going to now officially pivot to AI because it is a hot topic. And so I'm interested from all of you in, is it a hot topic that you're implementing and doing a lot with? Or is it a future promise that you're trying to figure out how you're going to use AI, machine learning, these types of things? And then just interested in some of your use cases that you're either trying out or what you're seeing or doing in supply chain. Who wants to start?
That's a good one. I would say AI, everyone's testing and learning right now. There's probably a bunch of small little tests going on across Walmart, but there's overarching themes on how we're approaching AI. At its core, Walmart believes that we're tech-powered, but people-led. And so as we're thinking through how do we find the synergy between AI and our people in our distribution centers, our people in our stores and clubs, that's a cool intersection that we're really exploring right now. And how I think about that even further upstream is how do we use AI to understand trend? Walmart's a retailer, so we got to understand trend for our customers. And what we're doing is trying to capture that trend and then turn that into products and enable our manufacturers to understand and get that signal from Walmart. And so that's something new that we're exploring. That's kind of a new use case that we have.
Like consumer trends on what they're buying, and then how to innovate products that the consumer wants. Okay.
Yeah, typical products have a really long lead time to launch at a retailer.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do is how do we use AI to tighten that timeline, tighten the supply chain, give more confident signals, give feedback. And that feedback loop is super important because it's not a linear cycle anymore. It's actually a cycle where you're feeding that demand back into what drives more volume, more ideas of what that trend actually could be in the future. So that's how Walmart's approaching it.
Yeah. So a lot from the customer perspective, an innovation perspective.
Yeah. Our customers and our members and Sam's Club, they're very engaged. They want to tell us. We just got to listen.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. That's amazing. I have some Sam's Club feedback for you later.
Love it.
You know, I'd say, because I think you expected me to respond first, and I intentionally did not.
No. Why might look like this?
Yes, I saw it. I saw you. You know, what I'd say is, given we are a hyperscaler, right? Everybody can code, right? Everybody codes. And so in some ways, it is, it's repurposing the coding capabilities into what I need versus everybody coding into lots of options.
Yes.
Because those options decrease scale, right? And when I think about our customers and what they need from us, a lot of our customers are coming from unstructured sets of data. They're coming from places where they want to be in cloud, but oh my gosh, they have the perfect person who's created 4 or 5 different versions of something, and they've scrambled it together 4 different ways, and then they can't get out of it. Right?
Yes.
And so for us, in our own use case, as well as in what we do for customers, it is being able to take that data and give it to them in a way that's structured. Some people want to own it themselves.
Yeah.
Others aren't sure what to go do with it. And being flexible, right?
Yes.
And there's almost no customer that's not multi-cloud. Right. There are some that have one, but largely they're all in different places, right? Depending on, which of these technologies and these apps, et cetera, you use. And so we work on sort of empowering folks to innovate, but innovate where it's meaningful and intentional, right? Versus innovating everywhere. Because from a supply chain, with all the individual things you have, you can lose scale very, very quickly, and your costs can get out of control, right? And then therefore you have all kind of margin hit, and your free cash flow is not what it needs to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it is a harnessing and an integration where they come together to say, I'm going to leverage this AI on these things, whether it is how I do warehousing and the infrastructure that we lay out, whether it is how I go into a new country with legal entity structures, whether it is how I go in and even look at talent development, because we're doing quite a bit of work on talent development and helping our talent learn how to use this technology in a way that does not cause them to run off or be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are afraid and they assume they're not going to have opportunities. That's not the case.
Yeah, no.
Right? You got to do it the right way. So for me, coming from a place where everybody can write a script and code, and then me having to learn how to do that myself.
Hey, you have someone right here.
I know how to do it. Learning how to do a little bit of that myself. It really is a repurposing and harnessing, and then taking what we've got and being able to really ensure that we're having customer empathy associated with why we serve the business.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, working for SAP, data and who owns the data and where the data is a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we love GCP, by the way.
I'm glad to know that. Yes. Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, part of what I presented earlier today was actually on how we are digitizing our supply chain and how AI plays a massive part in that. But I don't want to lose the point that you mentioned, Kyle, which was about the importance of the people aspect of it. And for me, it's that Venn diagram in that, yes, there is the technology element of it, of which, and as I shared earlier in one of the presentations, is that unless the data is right, it really doesn't matter, because you've got to win hearts and minds, and you have to have trust in the data set. And we actually delayed our ERP system twice till we got the data right and we got the process right. And we got people involved and engaged in it to ensure that actually we were driving the value proposition. And we talk about how we are moving from an AI perspective that's facilitating us, allowing us to actually move from a place where people gather data in order to make decisions to where machines generate data to liberate people to actually ensure that we're driving the accuracy that we can maintain through the data set that we have. And that actually has been an unlock in engaging folks in around ensuring that not just you have the ability to get the data inside, but that you're using the data appropriately in order to feed the machine.
Yeah.
But it's been quite liberating for us.
I heard somebody say the other day that AI has taken the difficulty out of processes, broken processes, and has allowed them to actually focus on doing their jobs, which was an interesting take because I do think sometimes we feel like, especially in supply chain, working on those broken processes, the transactional element is our job, but that's actually not our job. Yeah, so it helps you see and unleash or allow you to think about how you can unleash the power of AI into just more resilient supply chains.
Yeah. And I think the build for me on that space is that then we've got to ensure that actually people follow the process.
Yeah.
Because we have a tendency to be innovative as part of our culture and try to find opportunities around rather than necessarily adhere to it. And that's one of the beauties of actually mapping out how things work and giving us optionalities in round decisions is that it takes away the opportunity for people to find avenues around and distract us from actually achieving the goal that we need to achieve, which AI is uniquely positioned to be able to generate that for us.
I think it's really important too because, people used to spend so much time trying to gather the data, trying to understand the data, looking for the data in 10 different places, right? You almost had to do a little bit of retraining because now the data is here for you and I want you now to ingest it and then come back to me with some rational understanding on what it's telling you.
Yeah.
And so, they're so used to this, I got to get it and I get it. And I'm like, but that's how you make mistakes. Now, this model is helping you pull out the data. And I was thinking about a conference call that I had right before I came in. And it was I just hit the little button and it said start taking notes. Everyone introduced themselves and we got off the call and the notes were done.
I know.
I was like, oh my gosh, this is so nice. Because I could then focus on what I wanted them to deliver and what I needed them to accomplish instead of trying to make sure everything else is corrected. Right?
Someone took the
Yeah. The AI tool took the notes.
Yeah.
Gemini says, I got you. You want to take notes? Yes, please.
Yeah.
And it takes notes. And we hang up the call and everybody gets the notes right away. And I think I may have made one correction.
Wow.
I've been using it, just one, because this person was in the room and they didn't join with something called companion mode.
Yeah.
So it says the Brookhaven room. And I'm like, okay, this is so-and-so substituted for this one. And that's it, right?
Yeah.
So it really is enabling us to do more with the resourcing that we have because you don't have to do this. And now you can get to these other things that we never had time for with the same amount of resources. And if I look at even my productivity path, the scale leverage that we're getting in terms of what we can do. And it doesn't mean we're not still hiring because we are. There are a lot of things that we want to get done. Yeah. And we're always short on resources for different reasons, whether it's the capability of the resource, whether I can't have the resource that I want at this moment in time, if there's a skill imbalance or something like that. What this is doing is now allowing us to leverage this technology to bring forth and to bring out some of the talent that we've had in the individuals who were sitting there and just didn't ever have time to get to it.
Yeah.
And so, as I said earlier, time is currency. It gives me a currency to leverage, which is amazing. And I am so appreciative because you can be, you can really be outpaced with meetings. Right? You can meet yourself to meet on the meet for the meet.
Yeah.
And so having some help and capability in that space is really, really a huge benefit to us in supply chain.
Couldn't agree more. It's so interesting how you get fixated with the tyranny of the urgent.
Yeah.
And the reality is that we spend so much time in meetings. One of the things that we've started to critique was, do you need to be at the meeting? So we've actually parceled out some of our meetings that are decision meetings, some of the meetings that are informed meetings, and then others that are more about the longer term opportunity, because that's where we want most people to be involved and engaged in. And it's actually okay for people to opt out of meetings, which is super difficult for us because we feel like we need to be involved and informed, but there's many ways for to get that information, of which AI is a tool that's helping us to do that. But I think if there's an unlock for, not just within supply chain, but I think across many enterprises, is that how can we liberate ourselves not to be in so many meetings?
I mean, I'll just piggyback on that a little bit, because when you talk about that, one of the things we've done that has been probably more helpful than I ever understood is we have focus days. And so you're not allowed to have any meetings. You're just going to focus. And what you can do the next day after the focus day, because you actually had time to sit and be with the data, be with the information, to understand the elements that you need to get done, even in just managing performance, right? In terms of like, these are the kind of things I want to talk about for my organization. These are the places where we need to go. And everybody having that. That's the key.
Yeah.
Because if supply chain has a focus and everybody else doesn't, you really don't. Because we're needed in all these engagements.
This is true.
And so making it company-wide has shown itself to be a huge enabler, so people can actually get some work done and then really use some of that technology.
Do people abide by it? Does
Very rarely do we have things that cause us not to adhere to it.
Okay.
So I believe, while I won't quote numbers or percentage, I think there's a high percentage of people who respect it, because if you start to try and schedule, they're like, focus day. But they will remind you.
That's great. That's great.
Do you have something similar?
I wish I did. I'm going to take it back.
Well, we just kicked it off a while back in General Mills, so we call it Freeform Friday. I'm not so sure my team are enamored with it, because I tend to get a lot of meetings and one-to-one with catching up with folks on the Friday. But it does give you time to think, which is vitally important for us all and our teams. And allows me in particular to get set up for the week ahead. So and it's company wide.
That's good.
So that's really similar to yourselves.
So you guys are starting to eke into something I was very curious about, because I heard on the stage yesterday they were talking about the talent. Almost in every session I was in, talent and supply chain was a topic. And the challenge on recruiting, retaining, and developing talent. And Monique, you're looking at me like, we don't have that problem. But
Didn't say that.
No. Okay, I'm reading your expression, and maybe that's not the case. And I found it interesting to, if you were in the booths, you saw that Tennessee was here, their supply chain group, which is I love that they're here trying to make connections for their students, which is really important. So where are you all on this spectrum of trying to retain and trying to find talent? And listen, I have teenagers, so I know this next generation is totally different. They view the world very differently. So curious about the talent journey.
I think supply chain professionals have always been excellent problem solvers. And so you look towards engineers, you look towards business, you look internal to your company around who are the best problem solvers, how do I put there? In COVID, that turned into firefighters. And so we've had to learn coming out of COVID, what's the right talent we need to take data, be data-driven, and make decisions quickly. And I think those are the skills that we're obviously looking for. And more, we actually are starting to find that in different places in our organization, where we typically would have said a merchant that runs a P&L and picks items, they can actually be great at supply chain. And so how do we cross-pollinate even within Walmart on what those supply chain roles need to look like? It's something we've wanted to do for a while, and I think with different capabilities in the organization, we've been able to do it more than ever. And so we're looking internal even more external than we have before.
That's interesting. So you're kind of cross-trained. And do you have any challenge with people wanting to come to supply chain, or is supply chain in Walmart seen as like a place to be?
I think there's definitely perception management that you have to do around what is supply chain. Because to Monique's point earlier, supply chain is everywhere, whether you like it or not. And so everyone during COVID had to be a supply chain professional. And so I think everyone got to learn about it and realize that it's not just trucks and distribution centers. It's bigger than that, and it's solving critical problems on how we flow goods all the way up and down the supply chain. And so that's exciting, and everyone wants to be a part of that because that's tangible, it's real. You have when you leave work at the end of the day, you have things that you said, I did this, and I think that's what's really attractive to folks that want to come, and there's a pull into supply chain for that.
Interesting. I really love that what you said is supply chain professionals are problem solvers, and you just look for the problem solvers. Yeah, that's interesting. Anybody else have a perspective?
Well, one of the things that is front and center for us as an enterprise is creating a culture of belonging, that people feel that they have not just a part to play, but be part of the organization. And we've been very conscious about the networks that we've created. The one that I recently actually was the executive sponsor for was our disability network. And, we don't have it 100% precise, but we have directionally correct about ensuring that people feel that they have a role to play within the organization, whether that be in supply chain or across the enterprise in its entirety. That's allowing us to we've got a pretty high retention rate, but we're very conscious about it. And we're very conscious about creating that environment where people feel that they have a part to play.
Do you work in your office 5 days a week, 3 days a week?
Yeah, we have a myriad of different options, which, but they are selected and agreed with your line manager. I would say on average, we're probably about half the time during the week. I purposely am there 4 times a week because I actually live in an apartment with my wife, and my wife said you need to be at work. So,
don't come home.
So the dog growls at me when I arrive too early. So I actually go into the office 4 days a week, and then on Friday, as I said, we have Freeform Friday, which allows us to be more liberal in where you need to be, because you don't necessarily need to be at meetings in work.
Yeah.
But on average, we would have about maybe 2.5 days. The one thing that we do, which I think has been an unlock for us and has allowed people to select where and what days they come in, we have what we call moments that matter. So particular meetings or days or occasions where we would expect folks to be there because there's something particular. In some cases, it's a courageous conversation that we're having. And therefore, rather than be listening to that, it's more impactful for people to be in the room and present. And they tend to be on Thursday, which tends to be when most folks come in.
When most of the folks come in. And do you call them moments that matter?
Yes,
So
yeah, we do. We're intentional about it. We're intentional about the networks. One of the things that I'm particularly proud of in supply chain is that we created, we've got our women's network, but we created one within supply chain, which is called WISC, which is Women in Supply Chain.
We have the same as well.
Yeah.
It's the same acronym?
The exact same.
Oh, yeah.
And it's something that I inherited, but it's front and center. Actually, my leadership team is over 50% women.
Wow.
We have over 40.
Had you on stage yesterday.
We have over 40% of females at director level and above, and we have a pipeline of women leaders that we have been absolutely focused and fixated, because that is of absolute paramount to us to ensure that we have that representation.
That's amazing, Paul.
But it's over years. It's not something that you just decide and you turn on.
Yeah.
This is, you have to be conscious in that space that you're going to focus on it and that you're going to make decisions on it. And there's nothing more rewarding when you see a lot of our female talent that have been, and actually some of them will be presenting here today as well. So it's very exciting.
That is exciting.
Yeah. So you know what I'd say? I think we call multiplier moments. So very similar, right? And then the Wiskinet is just amazing, right? Everybody loves acronyms, don't they?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Acronyms. But I think you have to recruit differently these days, right? Students and adults who come into the workforce they come from different points of their experience, and they look for different things. And so we have what we call googliness, where we have the URGs and ERGs, underrepresented groups.
Oh, I watched the movie. Interns.
Correct. Yeah. But then we give everyone what's called 20%.
Yeah.
So you get to do these kind of things that are just not part of your day job that you like to do. And that includes even the executive assistants. They get to have a 20%. Where they get to go work on some particular project they like. They get to go work on charities they enjoy. They get to go work on serve options in terms of the community. And that helps people have purpose, because the day-to-day is what it is, and you have to innovate and think through some things, but being able to have something that takes the edge off of the work to allows you to just a little bit of refocus. And it's not every day of the week. It's not every point in the month, but there are times where you get to go leverage this 20%. So it could be a serving opportunity. It could be an apprenticeship opportunity. So we work with universities and high schools. And they love the high school students that come in because they challenge you and they ask you some of the most amazing questions. Right? And so I think recruiting is now different than what it used to be.
Okay.
In terms of the things that interest people.
Yeah.
And we're constantly evolving and understanding what kind of things do we need to change and what kind of things do we need to adjust for. Because the millennials today, right, I'm a different type of generation. It's just very, very different. But they still want purpose. They still want to know that they're adding value. They still want to understand what can be done to enable them to feel good. But they need these other social things. And so how do you give way to make sure they've got community wherever they are? Like, we don't hire one particular underrepresented person into a location by themselves. We call them singletons. We try not to have singletons. So you need to have two. So people can create one is a fire starter, the other one who can help create the fire. So you bridge and bring some community with yourself. Or if you're in a location and you're a singleton, we assign someone to make sure they're with you, because otherwise people will come in, and we don't have a lot of attrition, but people leave for different reasons, and they're all pretty common, and we know what they are.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure people never left. No one ever leaves because you came in as a singleton, you didn't find a community, you didn't find someone that you could feel like you've got a place to grow. You get the 2 years on your resume, and then you're out the door.
Yeah.
Right? That would be considered a failure for us.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure we create a place, and we are constantly involved, and we do a refresh on what's working, what's not working, so that we can continue to evolve that, which is where multiplier moments came from, because we were learning that there were some places that, we just weren't touching, and we had to go in and make some adjustments, and we all get graded on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And well, both of us being in tech, we know we're constantly, I think, pressured to do the next best thing. We're all, talent kind of goes between a lot of these tech companies. Are you returned to office? Yeah. How many days?
I'm in 3 days a week.
Yeah.
And it's 3 days physically at that particular office.
Yeah.
But if you add in travel, we're all in 4 to 5 days a week. Depends on what you're going.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but people enjoy that, right? And some offices 2 days, sort of like you. Some offices 3 days. We have a little bit of remote still.
Yeah.
There are the people who are remote for like just a different reasons, and we have some really good programs. If you've got I'm making it up, you got a family situation where you got to go take care of someone and you need 3 months to go do that, we allow you to go do that and keep working on whatever time schedule that needs to occur to help you with that.
Wow.
And it doesn't require a major situation associated with how can I make this work. We have work from anywhere a month. So I can work from Aruba, I can work from Venezuela, and you don't have to ask for permission. It's part of the benefit package where you get to work anywhere you want to work from. And that counts as your days in. And so people love that because they will go to some of these exotic places because they've got a place somewhere, or they got some girlfriends they want to hang out with, and they, will blend their schedule around. And a lot of them go to like the exact opposite time zone, because they can do the work on the schedule we're on and then hang out with their friends out there.
Right. They don't have to be on call.
I'm like, you know what?
Yeah.
Sleep is your issue.
Yeah.
I just need to be able to get the work done. And they love that. And the younger generation, they just love that kind of opportunity.
Yeah, they really do. They love experiences.
They are. It is an experience organization of people. You hear me?
Yes, that is so true.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to pause here for a second. This is fantastic, by the way. You're really doing a great job. We do have time for one last round of everyone getting a chance to say something, and then we're going to stop. So maybe you could even start this with the time we have left. I'd like to talk about, and once everyone has had a chance to say their thing, if you could thank them.
That'd be great.
All right.
I'm just going to ask, are you returned to office? And maybe you can answer that really quickly, and then I'll go.
And you'll do that.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
great.
Okay. So what about Walmart? Are you returned to office?
Yeah, we're largely returned to office. We believe collaboration happens best in person.
Yeah.
And so that's what we focus on. So I'm in most days. But my definition of being in a global sourcing organization could be in India, it could be in Thailand, it could be in Europe. And so we're sourcing from products all over the world and meeting with our suppliers. And so it's kind of an always-on, different time zone approach that we take as well. And so that tends to be a lot of travel, a lot of time away from family, but also really good to be with our teams locally and in the offices. Yeah. So that's what we focus on.
Oh, okay, good. So we're all at different parts of this journey with talent, but you all had some really good advice and some good tidbits. I'm going to write it down too. So we have time for one last question. So I maybe just want to go around to each of you, and I asked the panel I was on yesterday this question too. what's keeping you up at night in supply chain, or what is the one thing that you foresee or are foreshadowing happening in supply chain over the next 5 years?
I think you're going to see continued automation in the U.S. And so if you travel to Europe and you go into factories or into distribution centers, you'll see automation that's been there for maybe 10 years or longer. The U.S. is just getting on to more and more automation in these facilities, and that requires us to adapt the talent that's in these facilities on how we operate them. And so it doesn't keep me up at night, but I think it's a huge opportunity for us, especially in the U.S., to learn from different parts of the world and the journeys that they have had to go on from an automation perspective. And I know we've been talking about automation for a long time, but that's something that we definitely keep a keen eye on in different ways. More so in our suppliers organizations of like, how are they thinking about automation? Are we seeing automation in a car manufacturing facility that actually would work really well over here in this food manufacturing facility? And how do we take and share knowledge across industries? And that's something that we'll see more and more of, I think.
Interesting.
For me, I think we're going to have to, what we're working on is really, we haven't talked about it much, but I think we're going to have to be more intentional on sustainability from a supply chain standpoint, because we impact that quite a bit. And I think we're going to have to be thinking about the regulatory environment as fast as things are changing.
Yes.
I think I'm hoping that the U.S. does not have an abrupt execution in terms of how we begin to do that strategy, because you see it happening globally in other countries, and it's preparing ourselves for what that's going to look like and how can we be in front of it instead of behind it.
Yeah, interesting. On the list of topics that everyone wanted to hear about, I'm surprised sustainability wasn't on top of that list. That was shocking for me for supply chain. Yep. And I also had a question that we're not going to have time to get to on the regulatory environment and maybe how your planning is going with the upcoming elections. Are you doing dual planning for different situations? And not to get political, but maybe afterwards we can talk about that.
Yeah.
What about you, Paul?
Yes, those areas are areas of focus. I think the one thing that we're focused on in General Mills is about the engagement of our folks and how do we keep people engaged in an environment that's going to continue to change. I think there's a certainty in that we're probably going to see some disruption. Some will be micro disruptions, some could be bigger disruptions. But as we've learned, whether it be through COVID, through inflation and all the other aspects, supply chain hasn't stabilized back to the time where it just used to be, fixated on driving out that last 1 or 2 or 0.1 or 0.2%. We're in a lot more volatile environment in totality, and therefore keeping our folks engaged. I think they'll be energized. I think they will be engaged from a perspective of finding more opportunity within supply chain. Therefore, talent retention will be key as well. So the value proposition hasn't solely to be about the work, but it's about work where they feel that the new generation, especially that are coming into supply chain, feel that they're making a difference. Rather than just a task of a job that needs to be done, but they were making a difference, whether that be sustainability or whether that be a higher purpose of which supply chain is uniquely positioned to actually offer them. And I think will entice more folks that weren't historically thinking about supply chain into that realm, the sphere of what supply chain can bring and the difference that it can make.
I agree, and amen to that. I was thinking that when we were talking about this next generation, they really care about the world in a different way. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you all for being my guests on this panel today. You were just very insightful, and it was my pleasure to host you today. So thank you, and have a great rest of the event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. Thanks for joining us.